Again, I ask, did they stumble so as to fall beyond recovery? Not at all. Rather, because of their transgression, salvation has come to the Gentiles to make Israel envious. This is similar to what God did when he sent them into Babylonian captivity 600 years earlier. They were supposed to, he said this also in the Corinthians letter, that when they were sitting there surrounded by people who spoke a language they didn't understand, it was supposed to be a sign to them that they were now in a state of disfavor with God. They had taken from, this is 600 years ago, they had taken for granted their favored status with God, and now they're surrounded by people who are speaking a foreign language, and they have to accept that they're not favored by God any longer. It's a similar thing here. Salvation is being accepted. God's offer of salvation, which has gone out to all the world, is being answered by, that call is being answered by people primarily who are not ethnic Jews. This is supposed to spur ethnic Israel on to accepting the salvation as well. But if their transgression means riches for the world, and then loss means riches for the Gentiles. So if we benefit despite the chosen actual ethnic people being in a disfavored state, how much greater riches will their fullness bring? So just think about how much better things will be when the Israelites are responding the way they are supposed to. If we're having this much blessing and favor go out to the world now with the Jews not being a part of it, think of how much better it will be when they are a part of it. I'm talking to you Gentiles. Inasmuch as I am the apostle to the Gentiles, I make much of my ministry, in the hope that I may somehow arouse my own people to envy and save some of them. He's mentioned before in the Corinthians letters that he becomes all things to all men to save as many as he can. Now, Paul constantly talks about himself as an apostle to the Gentiles, which he did go to the Gentile regions, of course. But it's interesting to see that his pattern always was, everywhere he went, to go to the synagogue first. Every town or city he went to, even though he was a self-designated, God-designated apostle to the Gentiles, he always went to the synagogue first. I guess he was trying to arouse his own people to jealousy and save them, I guess. For if their rejection is the reconciliation of the world, what will their acceptance be but life from the dead? So he is envisioning a status. You have to remember, up to this point in time, most of Paul's problems are coming from other Jews. This is being written probably in the spring of 57 AD. And up to this point, most of Paul's enemies are his own fellow countrymen. Occasionally not. Occasionally there's been some Roman magistrate or idol. In Ephesus he had the Artemis silversmiths who were after him. But generally speaking, his enemies so far have been Jews. And so, and the Christians' enemies so far have been Jews. So he's thinking to himself, well, how much more effective will my ministry be, or how much better will this be if we could just get my fellow countrymen to believe in the Messiah? Now, this did not end up happening, okay? About 10 years after he writes this letter, a war is going to break out between Judea and Rome, which will end up involving the destruction of the land of Judea, the city of Jerusalem and the temple. And that will pretty much be the end of Judaism as a religious state. Paul won't be there to see that. He'll be dead by that time that happens. So Paul will not really see how this actually resolves itself in the course of time. But at this point, he's probably still thinking of some ideal future where the Jews do accept Christ. They become partners in the outreach of the Messiah's kingdom. And he's thinking to himself, how much better will it be when they do? Unfortunately for him, that never actually happens. But at least he's not there to see it when that doesn't end up happening. For if their rejection, it means the reconciliation of the world, what will their acceptance be but life from the dead? If the part of the dough offered as first fruits is holy, then the whole batch is holy. If the root is holy, so are the branches. If some of the branches have been broken off, and you, though a wild olive shoot, have been grafted in among the others, and now share in the nourishing sap from the olive root, do not boast over those branches. If you do, consider this. So you are a Gentile believer, a member of God's covenant family today, the church. And you, in a sense, have taken the place of the Jews who are now in a state of active rebellion against God by not accepting His Messiah. So don't boast over that, okay? Don't boast over their fall for your gain. You have gained by their fall, you have, but don't boast over that. If you do, consider this. You do not support the root, but the root supports you. You will say to me then, branches are broken off so I can be grafted in. Granted, that's true. But they were broken off because of unbelief. And you stand by faith. So you are a believer. They're not. You are. Do not be arrogant, but be afraid. For if God did not spare the natural branches, He will not spare you either. So if you fall out of belief, which is possible because He's warning them not to, He assumes it's possible, otherwise He wouldn't be saying this. If you fall out of belief, if you end up deciding for whatever reason you don't believe it, again, He talked earlier about nothing can separate us from the love of Christ, the love of God. Well, one thing actually can, that's you. If you decide not to continue, you can be broken off again, and some other branch can be put in your place. So just because the natural branches have been broken off, and you've been put in their place, that is true. But that doesn't mean that you're permanent. That doesn't mean that you can't be broken off too if you end up doing what they did and falling in unbelief. Consider, therefore, the kindness and sternness of God. Sternness to those who fall, but kindness to you, provided that you continue in His kindness. Otherwise, you also will be cut off. And if they do not persist in unbelief, they'll be grafted in. For God is able to graft them in again. After all, if you were cut out of an olive tree that is wild by nature, and contrary to nature, were grafted into a cultivated olive tree, how much more readily will these natural olive branches be grafted back into their own olive tree? I do not want you to be ignorant. So don't be too ignorant or arrogant, and don't assume that you can't fall like they did. So some people will tell you this. Some people will say that once saved, always saved. That isn't true, otherwise Paul wouldn't have written this. If once saved, always saved is true, then he would never have written about feeling anguish in his heart over the state of his fellow Jews because they were fallen. They had been God's chosen people in his covenant, but they're not right now. If once saved, always saved is true, then he wouldn't have even written any of this. If once saved, always saved is true, then he wouldn't be warning the Gentiles who have been grafted into the tree and as opposed to natural branches, don't fall out of unbelief, because otherwise you could be removed too. He wouldn't be saying that if you're once saved, always saved. I do not want you to be ignorant of this mystery, brothers, so that you may not be conceited. Israel has experienced a hardening in part until the full number of the Gentiles has come in. And so all Israel will be saved, just as is written. The deliverer will come from Zion. He will turn godlessness away from Jacob. And this is my covenant with them when I take away their sins. This goes back to the prophetic language of the Old Testament. Obviously, he is quoting from Isaiah and Jeremiah here. But remember also, the Old Testament was very clear that only a remnant would be saved. That remnant in turn would be all Israel. Those would be the faithful Israelites. But that doesn't mean every single one of the number that existed. As far as the gospel is concerned, they are enemies on your account. But as far as the election is concerned, they are loved on account of the patriarchs. For God's gifts and His call are irrevocable. Just as you who were at one time disobedient to God have now received mercy as a result of their disobedience, so they too have now become disobedient, and they may now receive mercy as a result of God's mercy to you. For God has bound all men over to disobedience, that He may have mercy on them all. This goes back to what he's been saying since the beginning, that Jews and Gentiles alike are all under sin, and all need salvation that comes by righteousness through faith. It's the same method, same means, same problem, same solution, same means, and same method. Oh, the depth of the riches of the wisdom and knowledge of God! How unsearchable his judgments and his paths beyond tracing out! Who has known the mind of the Lord, or who has been his counselor? Who has ever given to God that God should repay him? For from him, and through him, and to him are all things. To him be the glory forever. Amen. Next time, we will finish the book of Romans, chapters 12 through 16. 12, 13, and 14 are more advice about how to get along in a unified Christian setting. And then 15 and 16 are about Paul's personal travel plans and his greetings to the people in the church of Rome whom he knows. He has familiarity with already. I'll try to get both those sections done in the next reading, which will either be, well, it doesn't matter to anybody watching this video years from now, but this is Monday, February 3rd. I'm thinking it'll either be tomorrow or maybe on Friday.